your source for everything paranormal. Para X. The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Shall call. Live you must, and let to live. Fairly take, and fairly give. Do what thou will, if it harms none. By the magic of old, may it be done. 9 woods in the cauldron go, as above, so below. Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron on the Para X Radio Network. And now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Merry meet everybody, and welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. The opening music tonight was by Kevin MacLeod, and it was called Our Story Begins. Now tonight, our story begins with me telling you a little bit about my guest, Edith Mary Stanley. She's an Akashic Records and Master Tarot reader, psychic medium, artist, author, and spiritual teacher, and she's been in touch with Spirit all her life. She's here tonight to talk about her book, Tarot for the Clueless. And in the Tarot, the story begins with the Fool. And I know that fits me well at sometimes. But before you think too hard about that comment and nod your head about what I just said, Edith Mary, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, it's Tarot really kind of is confusing to a lot of people, and I think we can kind of simplify it because I was clueless in the beginning. Maybe I still am about it, because it's not something that you take lightly and you pick up a card and do, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But how long have you been reading the cards, and what drew you to them in the first place?
Many years ago, I inherited a round angel deck from somebody, and it's always fascinated me, but I never understood it. And then when I moved here to San Antonio, the gentleman that I was dating at the time showed me his deck, and I was like, "Oh, look at these. I know what this means. I know what that means. I know what that means." And that was the first time I had read cards. I knew the knowledge was just there.
Mm.
So I didn't learn anything in particular. It was just there. And I've studied obviously since then, but I don't know how I acquired that knowledge.
I think you probably brought it back with you from a previous life or something.
That's entirely possible.
Yeah, because there are people that are intuitive, and they can pick up a card and a deck, and without knowing it, they can kind of read what they see in the cards, and that's right. Although it is kind of subjective when you're looking really hard at it, but in general, tarot can be kind of a big, scary undertaking to learn for some people because. It's not like an oracle deck whose cards are fairly simple. Oracle decks don't have major or minor arcanas. They don't have different suits. The symbology is usually much easier. And lots of oracle decks don't use reversals or spreads, layouts, and the list goes on. So these kinds of things can deter beginners and even about wanting to attempt to learn because it's so, whoa, I got all this to figure out. Like I said, anybody can draw a card from a tarot deck and read its meaning, but everybody gets a deck, a book with the deck when they get a tarot thing, so they can read that too. But a true tarot reading, I believe, goes a lot deeper than that and has many more aspects, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It is much deeper. I usually recommend throwing the book away because if it's not coming from your intuition and all you're doing is reading the symbols on the cards and applying that to your client, you're missing at least 75% of your reading because it's a trigger for your intuition or your psychic nature. And so the card means different things to different clients at different times. Mm-hmm. And the tarot is very much alive and a living being, and it evolves as you evolve. Your understanding evolves. And when you get more understanding or more in touch with your intuitive nature, the cards become more profound. Yeah, you kind of form a bond with the cards, and whatever it is, people will say, well, do you get messages from spirit? Is that how you see the card, or is it coming from yourself? But no matter what way you believe that happens, and I'll ask you what you think how that happens, but in any case, it comes from your gut. It comes from your heart when you're reading the right way. Very much so. If you're not reading with your heart and an open mind, then there's no point. So where do you think we get the intuition or the messages or, the ability to read these cards? I wish I knew that. If I could answer that, I'd probably make $1 million off of it. But for me, it's a knowing. They just put the idea in my head and I have to run with it. I did a reading for a friend today and I knew that it was a health reading. But I couldn't say it in the beginning because, no, that's not it. And then all of a sudden it became very evident that it was a health reading, and I ignored that original gut instinct and tried to do something else with it. And so the tarot, your guides and the cards will bring you back to center when you're not doing it correctly. If you're listening. If you don't listen to your guides, then there's, again, no point in doing it at all. But I think some people, they hear the message. Some people know the message. Some people just read the symbols and trust that the symbols are correct. So I think every person gets that intuitive hit in a different way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I agree with you on that because but the one thing that you mentioned was that you knew it was a health reading, but you weren't going to say it, and it turns it around, and you didn't listen to that little voice at first. And I think that's a question. That's something that we all do because in some ways we don't trust ourselves. Exactly. If we would just realize it's not coming from us, it's coming from an external source, mm-hmm. or a source that is not us. Like with me, it's internal, but that's the source of that message is from spirit or God or tarot masters, ascended masters, mm-hmm. who knows. Mm-hmm. But they put it in my mind. That's what I should go with, and I just don't always because I'm not going to do. Exactly, and that's the first thing they teach you: listen to that voice, and mm-hmm. because if you hear it and you start thinking about it, you're going to overthink it. And mm-hmm. take yourself somewhere away from where you need to be to begin with. Exactly. That's why I recommend throwing away the book that comes with your cards, because if you rely on that book, you're missing half of what it really means. Mm-hmm. Because when you write the book, as you know, I wrote one, you can't include everything because they change and evolve with you. So you can't include everything that card could possibly mean. Otherwise, you'd be writing War and Peace on one card. Yeah, and, I want to interject, too, that between different decks and everything, some oracle decks work quite well in a tarot reading. Yes. I've mentioned this before, but it's
it's worth mentioning again that when I'm doing a tarot reading and I get stuck trying to interpret what I see, because as you know, sometimes the messages we're trying to interpret are a bit cryptic. I've been known to draw a card from my oracle deck, and it hasn't failed me yet. I mean, the simple meaning of that oracle draw always brought clarity when I've needed it. Have you ever tried that before?
Yes, I will quite frequently use 2 decks of cards and put one layout over the other. One, my everyday cards that I like to read with because that's what I started out with and it's just easy. And then I have a spirit deck, which is more subconscious, what's going on underneath. And so when you overlay the two together, it's surprisingly how they match and how much deeper you can get into your client's understanding and problems.
Yeah. It's kind of almost miraculous the way it works, you know, because it just does. You don't have to put much effort in it. You just have to know not to shoot yourself in the foot in the meantime.
Yeah, don't get in your own way.
Yeah, and that's the way with us. That's what we do as human beings a lot. Let's talk a little bit about the symbology, because some people just take the card at face value and they're not looking at the details of the picture, and therein lies some very important clues. Because, all right, again, with the Oracle deck, that picture is pretty much, you see what you get. But if you look at a tarot card, there are all these little nuances here and there, little pictures, little clues, and a lot of people don't pick up on that. So let's talk about that a little bit.
There are so many symbols and so many signs in the card. It's impossible to catch them all. I'm still, after I started reading in 2012, I'm still seeing new stuff in the cards that I never noticed before because I didn't need it for that client, so it didn't come to my attention. So when it pops out at me, it's like, ooh, that must be very significant. And so the symbols on the cards, you don't notice them all the time right away. They don't all apply to your client or to the person you're reading for all the time. Because one card may mean change for the same client 2 months later may mean don't change. So it has to be, the symbols all have to be read kind of in context to what's happening at that moment.
Mm-hmm. And then it also depends on the deck, because there are similarities in many of the decks, like the basic decks, but you know, people get very creative with their decks, and so the symbology on each card would be different. You keep your eye open.
Yeah, you do. That's one of the reasons why I stick to 2 decks, because although I have many more, and they're just so wildly different, that's that person's who drew the decks, that's their interpretation. Staying with one deck has an advantage in that you become intimately familiar with the deck itself, and the symbology. When you're switching off decks, it can throw you off, which is why I stick to just 2 decks, and the others are just collector's items. But it is just the between the decks, you need to find one that speaks to you. Don't just go with the first one you find. Find one that speaks to you, something that says, "Ooh, this is pretty. I can work with this." Pretty, because I'm also an artist. It's got to be pretty for me to look at. You know.
Well, sometimes it is. I mean, my favorite deck is very colorful, not, you know, very deep, rich, royal colors. You know, the deep reds, the emeralds, the sapphires, and that's what attracted me to that deck. Just because of that. I mean, the artwork is very beautiful. Some people don't care about the artwork. So, you know, we're all different. So whatever, you know, when it whistles and taps you on the shoulder, that's the one you need to get.
Exactly. Now with my students, I just give them all a Rider-Waite deck because that's the penultimate deck anyway. Everything has grown out of that. So I just give them one of those and say, study till your fingers bleed.
Yeah, and then if you find, you know, shopping around, I mean, you know, you're not going to get struck by lightning if you change your original deck. I mean, I started out with Robin Wood deck because that, to me, was easy. That attracted me as a beginner. And then,
that's what as a matter of fact.
See? And so, you know, you can change from time to time, and you're not going to lose your ability to read. And like I said, the gods are not going to come down and smack you in the head for doing it.
No, as a matter of fact, when you learn to use your intuition. It doesn't matter from deck to deck to deck. I have read decks when I have forgotten mine at parties and whatnot, and they're like, here, take mine. So you can read it. Once you can read any deck, because it's not coming from the cards. It's coming from your intuition.
Mm-hmm. So what do you feel about, like, if you're going to grab somebody else's deck or something, or somebody's touching yours? I mean, there are a lot of people that refuse to have anybody touch their decks, and
yes, I know. I've crossed a few of those. It's a tool. It is. It's like my stirring spoon for the soup. It's a tool. It is. Yes, it's sacred, but so is my spoon. So the sacred tool is actually you, not the cards, in my opinion. There are plenty of people that disagree with me. I cannot read for you if you don't put your energy in the cards to some degree. Mm-hmm. And so I want you to touch the deck. I want you to shuffle them. I just, treat them. Put your energy in them. That way I can read what's there. Because it is no more sacred than anything else. It's like having sacred ground. Well, it's all sacred. There is no one spot that's more sacred than another. It's all sacred, and all should be treated that way. So the only real sacred tool you use is you.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes we can't get that in our heads that we are that tool, because we take the word tool as something negative. So, it's like, well, yes, I'm the tool. That doesn't always work too well. But, you made a good point in the book, that the symbolic, and we just talked about that, the symbology of the card is generally universal, but only to a point, because no two people think 100% alike, or they have different life paths or experiences. And you give a good example. Let's talk about the Temperance card that you talk about in the book.
The Temperance card is one that I absolutely hate for some reason or another. Let me grab a copy of my own book here.
Yeah, because, you did mention that because you don't have a lot of patience. That was...
I don't. I'm not with myself. I have infinite patience with others, but not myself. So I had to learn that it's not about patience. It's about refinement. The card is about keeping a foot in both worlds, the psychic world and the mundane world, and keeping everything in balance and refining your skills rather than being patient. Mm-hmm. So my initial reaction is, patience, great. I don't have any of that. But what I do have is the ability to have a foot in both worlds. What I do have is the ability to juggle lots of different things in my life, my psychic abilities being one of them. I also have the ability to hone my craft. So, it's the card is just rich. It is very rich in symbology. If you want to apply it to yourself or to your client or whomever, it is literally, you have to sit down and say, what does this mean to me right now in my life when you're studying the cards?
Yeah, and I kind of chuckled in a sense, but I wasn't laughing at you when in the book you said that whenever that card comes up, you kind of get a feeling of dread, because of its meaning.
Exactly, because I know it's like, it isn't just for the person I'm reading for, it's for me too. Now, I've never failed to have a reading or to do a reading for someone that something in their reading didn't apply in my life. Mm-hmm. And so I look at that as a personal affront from spirit because it's like, don't tell me I don't have any patience. Mm-hmm. And I've had to learn the hard way that card means something different. Yeah. And I had to learn to apply it to myself. Okay, this is what it really means. And you have to do that kind of with each card. That's why I tried to write in a group. I use the terms we and us and our because it's not just one person. It is you and your client make that two of cups. Mm-hmm. So everything applies to everybody. It's just how does it apply right now in this situation?
Okay, I've got a whole bunch of questions, so I think let's get to those for a second. All right, the first one says, when you do a reading, do you find it best to have the other person choose the cards, or would you rather place them for them? Maybe the decks. Maybe that's what she means.
For them to do the layout themselves?
It just says, Tabby, why don't you fill me in again? Here's again when it says, when you do a reading, do you find it best to have the other person choose the cards, or would you rather place them for them? Yeah, so I bet it sounds like for the layout.
Right. No, I just prefer they shuffle because I usually use the Celtic cross layout, but I will on occasion when Spirit says use a different layout, I will use and they wouldn't know what Spirit wanted me to do with the cards. So I just let them shuffle, put whatever energy into it, and then do whatever layout I'm inspired to do. Usually the Celtic cross. And I start explaining each card as I lay it down so that you build on that story.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that answers it. Now, Sherry wants to know which layout is best. That's an open question.
The one that speaks to you the most. The most common layout is the Celtic cross. But in the book, I think I put it in there anyway. I know it's in the other one. The sequel to this book is several other layouts. It's the one that I was inspired to do. And I call it my 9 patch because I used to sew, and it's like 9 cards laid out in a quilt pattern. And then there's the astrology layout, and then there's there's the 100 million different layouts you can try. Start with the most common, and then create your own bent on it. Change it to suit yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really important.
There's no one best. It is whatever speaks to you and whatever's easiest for you to use.
Yeah, some people are satisfied with the 3-card draw. It gets crazy.
A 3-card draw can tell you a huge amount of information if you apply it correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, big if, but but it's knowing what you're doing for sure. All right, another question. When reading the cards, doesn't it mean something different depending on which way the card is pointing? I think reverse.
Usually, but not always. And it's not the exact opposite. It is shades of meaning. So if you have, the Tower card. The Tower card comes in the shadow position or reversed, that can mean you're still going to have this horrible thing happen, but you won't feel so bad about it because you've been forewarned, and you can take measures to, if your car breaks down, you can take measures to have AAA or something like that. So if the change is going to happen, you already know about it. And then maybe it won't be so bad. So it's not that it means the exact opposite. It's again, the gray areas. And they go from black to white. So, and it's all that gray area in between. Again, it comes down to just intuition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
Sometimes I'll see like the Chariot reversed. Doesn't mean you're not in charge. It doesn't mean that you're being run over. It just means that maybe you need to take charge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in interpretation, there's another question here that kind of falls into that. If you see a card and you see it one way, how can you be sure it's meant that way for the person that you're reading?
Trust. Trust in your gut, trust in your intuition, trust in your spirit guides, trust in whatever they put in your head is going to come out of your mouth and it will apply, even if your client is saying, oh, no, that doesn't make any sense to me. Oh, no, you're wrong about that. And I've had some unhappy clients because I've told them things and they didn't want to hear it. Mm-hmm. And then they will come back to me later and say, you were right. I'm sorry. I didn't think about that at the time. So it's a matter of trusting yourself and your guides.
Yeah, and I think in any reading, whether it be tarot or psychic or whatever, lots of times you're told something that doesn't click right away.
Exactly.
And when that happens, I always say, you know what, just remember this and think about it, and it'll probably come to you later. It may not, but usually it does. It's just something that in the back of your mind and you forgot and whatever. So it doesn't mean that the reader is wrong, because the reader is giving you what Spirit gives them.
Exactly.
And so we say cards don't lie, and either do mediums
No,
good ones anyway.
People do.
But people do.
A lot of times it is something they don't want to admit.
That too. There are people that don't want you to know that you hit it on because it's something embarrassing to them or shameful or whatever. Yeah, because I think a lot of people go into any kind of reading, any kind of divination, and they're afraid that whoever is doing the divination is going to know what's deep down in their soul and know their whole history and see their life flash before their eyes. We don't.
No.
We're vapid. We just know what we see.
And they're not going to reveal that kind of stuff anyway. The other person's spirit guides won't let that kind of thing be revealed.
That's a good point. See, that should make them feel even better. So, as we were talking about in the beginning, there are just so many different layers to readings and understanding tarot and spreads. And I mean, it does get a little bit crazy. What's your best advice to somebody who wants to have a reading for the first time?
Don't be afraid. No one is going to tell you, a reputable person will not tell you bad news. They won't tell you when you're going to die. They're not going to tell you that you're going to lose your fortune. They're not going to tell you that you're going to get a divorce. A reputable person will find a way to bring up stuff to your awareness so that you can choose whether or not these things will happen to you. So if you're coming to a reading for the very first time, it's drop your preconceptions. It's not what you think, and it's not horrible. As readers, we help you get over the humps in life. We help you navigate some of the obstacles and give you a different perspective. That's all. That's what a good reader should do.
And should they ask for, mostly if you're going to have a reading, you probably have something specific in mind. But sometimes I don't want to know that. And I'll tell people that let me start out by doing some general cards and see, where you're at, what the cards are showing, and then jump in. I
don't like to know that information either, because if it's not going to come up in the cards, they don't need to know about it. A lot of times I'll tell each person that, you may want a specific question answered. But if it doesn't come up in the cards, they're telling you, don't worry about it. The cards will tell you what you need to know, not what you want to know.
Yeah, that's true. And that's a good way of putting it. It makes a lot of sense. It's really kind of interesting that people are afraid to be read or something. But there was a question in the chat room, too. Can having tarot readings turn into a crutch for people?
Yes.
Yeah.
Particularly if they are of an addictive personality, or they're constantly questioning themselves. They're constantly like, what does that mean? What does this mean? Does that have some kind of significant meaning? Everything to them has a meaning, and it doesn't. Not everything has a meaning. Sometimes it's just a pencil on the floor. And if you have this addictive personality, you can become addicted to your reader very quickly. That's why I tell my clients no more than 3 months. So every 6 months is great. Anything more than that, you're nullifying everything we just did. Because you're saying, you were wrong, let's hear something else. They're wanting to hear good news. They're wanting to hear they won the lottery and stuff like that, when that's not what it's for.
Yeah, exactly. I guess there's a lot of preconceived notions.
Yes.
Already, when people come into what's happening because you see it on TV, you see it in movies. Hollywood's done a great deal with that. And I think it's best.
Like that. It's not like on TV.
No, and I think it's really best for people to kind of come in, like you said, with an open mind. If you have a question in mind, a burning question, let the reader see what the cards are pulling, because invariably, if it's important enough, as you said, it will get covered in the reading.
Exactly.
And people think, well, should I not ask any questions? Should I be really, just listen? No, yeah. I think that it's important for them to ask questions and for clarity, if for no other reason, right?
Because I don't want anyone walking away from my table with a question unanswered. That's why people tell me all the time, you need to put a time limit on it. I'm like, no, I don't need to put a time limit on anybody. Because if I were in their position, I want all my questions answered. I want help. That's why I'm there. And so that's what I want to give.
And you give it well. And I'm going to give you a little breathing room right now. We're going to go to a break. And when we come back, guys, if you have any more questions, start throwing them at us. And in the meantime, we'll be back in about 2 minutes.
Don't go away. There's more Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks right after these important messages.
Rat, where are you going?
I'm going back to the paranormal view, back where I belong.
Please, take me with you.
No, I'm through with everything here. I want to see if there's something left in life I haven't explored. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, Rat, don't run to them. They talk about ghosts and hauntings, UFOs, and all kind of supernatural scary stuff.
You'll never understand, will you, Scarlet?
No!
Well, that's your misfortune.
Rat, if you go, where shall I go? What shall I do?
Frankly, my dear. Line.
Oh, you gotta be kidding.
That's the Paranormal View with your host, Henry Foister, Jeffrey Gould, and Barbara Duncan. Every Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the Para X Radio Network.
Hey everyone, it's Marla. If you like tonight's episode of Stirring the Cauldron and the archive podcast as well, take a look at the show's YouTube channel and check out the dozens of shows that are there just waiting to be heard. New shows are added each week, and while you're there, why not subscribe? It's free. And if you click on that tiny little bell icon at the top of the page, you'll be notified when new shows are available. Just go to youtube.com and then type in Stirring the Cauldron Para X and the link will appear. Just like magic.
Welcome back to Stirring the Cauldron. Once again, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
And we're back with my guest tonight, Edith Mary Stanley. And during the break, I got a question from the chat room, and it's certainly one that has no doubt been asked her a million times. So here goes. Are there beginner's decks, and should people just immediately get a beginner's deck right out the get-go? Or can they just, because some people think that you have to take the steps. Each deck is more productive. It's a better deck or something. So, I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but that...
No, I understand. Okay. No, there is no beginner's deck. There is a deck for you that sings to you, that you understand, that speaks to your soul, speaks to your intuition. However, for those just starting out, like I don't know diddly squat, I recommend the Rider-Waite deck. The Robin Wood deck is also easy to read and extremely similar to the Rider-Waite deck. And so those are the two basic decks. I'm sure there's others, but I don't know of them, that anyone would start out with. A good book on explaining, not the book that comes with the cards. I'm talking a bigger book that someone has written on all the cards. Joan Bunting comes to mind, has written a very good one. Mine is packed away in storage, or I would come up with a name. But that's the author. And it's there's Tarot for Dummies books. That's one place to start. They use the Rider-Waite deck as an illustration. In my books, I don't use any pictures because I was worried about copyright issues. Mm-hmm. That's why I just get a deck and here we go. The easiest, simplest, most time-honored deck is the Rider-Waite or the illuminated Rider-Waite.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, here's something. Now, this book, yours, Tarot for the Clueless, is talking about the major arcana, mostly explained, it says. Now, it seems to me that the trend now, I've seen it a lot, is that people are doing readings and creating decks only with the major arcana. How do you feel about that?
They're missing the other half. The major arcana are the archetypal images. They are the they don't speak of everyday life. Mm-hmm. They speak of the powers and the abilities, but they don't speak about the car breaking down. They don't speak about, oh, maybe you should change jobs. Maybe you should look for this new career, go back to school. Those cards are not going to give you that kind of day-to-day information. They're more overarching than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And back onto the topic of beginners decks. Here's my little soapbox. I'm not fond of those beginners decks that have a brief sentence of what each card means printed on the cards, because again, I think that sometimes that ends up being a crutch for one thing, and for another, it doesn't let the beginner get familiar with each card on their own and receive the message of the card in their own way.
Precisely.
And do you also say that when people get a new deck, it's good for them, aside from throwing away the book, to look at each and every card, and sometimes it's a long list of cards, but that's what, a lot of people do. They will just get to know each card one at a time. It doesn't have to be sitting down and flipping them all like whatever, but that's exactly. Kind of a good way to do it, don't you think?
Keeping a tarot journal of your cards, you go through, the first one in the deck is the Fool. So you sit down, you spend an hour or so looking at it, studying it, asking for information from your guides, and then writing down your impressions. This is what it means to me right now at this point in my life. And I do that with each card, until you're done with all 78 of them, and then start over. Because now that you're familiar with them and you're honing your intuition at the same time, you can get a deeper meaning or a more profound meaning or a higher spiritual meaning off of each one when you do it a second time. And you need, whenever you get a new deck and you want to work with the deck rather than just being a collector's item, you do the exact same thing. You go through it at least once and write down your impressions. Don't just think about it. Write them down, because when we write them down, they become more real. They become more solid, and they stick in our minds a little better.
And you talked about in the book about doing a tarot journal, and so that's what it encompasses, right?
Exactly. You write down what you think about each card, and then you keep notes on your client sessions. How did this go? Where do you think you went wrong? Where do you think you went right? How did the client feel about this? What were your successes? And so the next time the client comes back to you, they can tell you and fill in the blanks for you, because you won't necessarily know the answers to those questions until the client comes back. Mm-hmm.
And the journal is a good thing just to have handy in case you go a little blind at some time, because I mean, let's face it, if you're counting the reversals, there's 144 cards that you need to know. And that scares the bejesus out of people. How are they going to memorize that many cards?
And you can't. You really can't, which is why years later, I'm still finding new symbols in the cards. I'm still finding out new things about the cards. It's a lifelong study. If you really want to get into it, it is a lifelong study, because the tarot is a living thing, and it changes and evolves with you. So it's never going to be the same from day to day. And keeping that journal can help you go back to say, oh, I forgot about this, or write in a new impression, and just journaling your experience. I turned my journaling into a book of poetry at some point. That's how the tarot books came about. I was journaling about the cards, and I'm like, I've got a lot to offer here. Here we go. So it's just spending time with the cards and writing it down and revisiting it every now and again. And doing that for each deck you get, which can be a lot, and it is very intimidating. But don't worry about reversals, especially in the beginning. Reversals, I try very hard not to get my cards reversed. I straighten them out all the time. Not because they're hard to do, but because I don't want to sit there and have to interpret it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And as you said, it's not exactly the opposite of what the
Exactly. And
upright
so
card is.
I find no matter how hard I try, there's always one or two in the deck. And that's because that person needs that message more than anything else.
Mm-hmm. I think you answered this question in the beginning. It's from chat, but just in case you didn't and he didn't hear it, again, wanted to know how did you learn that you had a connection with the tarot?
I don't know. As a child, I would visit the spirit world quite frequently and play with other kids who didn't exist in the neighborhood when I went to look for them later. And that kind of stuff happened to me off and on my whole life. And as a teenager, I had to let that go because I just wanted to be normal like everybody else. And 20 years later, I'm like, I don't want to be normal anymore. I think I want to develop my psychic nature now. And so I had to work to get it back. All of a sudden, I just knew. Somebody, my spirit guides, somebody put the knowledge in me. Mm-hmm. How it got there, I cannot tell you.
Okay. Question from Darlene in the chat. Do you think anyone can read, or should someone just get a reading or just have an open mind when trying to read cards?
Yes. Anyone can read. Anyone can figure out what the symbols mean. Any good book of symbology will give you that. So anybody can read. Reading the symbols is very valid. However, if you want to take it to the next step, you have to work on your psychic abilities and work on your intuition and work with your spirit guides on the other side going, what does this mean at a deeper level? Or what does this mean on a spiritual level? Because there's those three levels. There's the mundane, there's the now, and then there's the spiritual, or the subconscious. You know, that Freud thing with the superconscious, conscious, and id or ego or something, whatever that was. College was a long time ago. And so it's all threefold. See, there's this, it's a threefold process, but you learning to integrate it to seamlessly for the client so that you just look like you know stuff and you can read minds is an art form. Not everybody can do that because not everybody wants to get in touch with that psychic ability because it scares them. But they can read symbols.
Yeah. Now, do you read for yourself?
No, I cannot read myself. I'm trying. Most people cannot because we're not objective about our own lives.
Mm-hmm, right.
And if you're not objective, you can't give a good reading, which is why I really, for the most part, I don't like to read for people I know because I'm no longer objective if I know you.
That's the whole thing. Objectivity is part of the game, and when you read for yourself, you're gonna interpret it to the good, whether it is or not. You know, you're gonna make
see what I want to see, not what's really there.
You're gonna make excuses for it. So yeah, that's not very good. All right. Now, as people read the book, they will start noticing that in addition to the meaning of the card, you also talk about the card's shadow side. So let's talk about what the shadow side is.
The shadow side is what we hide from ourselves, the stuff we're in denial about or trying to run away from. It's also our subconscious, what is happening on a subconscious level that we're maybe not aware of. Sometimes it is indicating that other people around you are working against you in some way. So it's much more about what's going on that you can't see. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Well, shadow, can't see. Yeah, it does. And also, one of the things that you do, at the end of each card description in the book, you have a question that the reader can consider and meditate on, which is really, really helpful. And while I've read several books on the tarot over the years, I've not seen a book that has done that before.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So what was your purpose there?
To make people think. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's the whole point of coming to see a psychic or a tarot reader or a counselor or, psychologist is to get a different perspective. If I can make people think, I don't care what you think, I just want you to think. I want you to help yourself and figure it out. So that's what the questions are for, is to give you some area that might relate, you feel like you relate to, that, oh, maybe I could change this. Maybe this does mean that. Maybe I can help that client by asking them that question.
Yeah, and I'll give an example. Like for the Sun card, the questions for consideration and meditation are, am I hiding my light? Why am I afraid to stand out and shine? In what way am I holding myself back? Do I seem like a braggart? Do people view me as a brown-noser? Am I too flamboyant or outlandish? And so those are all questions that will certainly make them think.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Most of the time, I'm not even half, but most of the time we are totally unaware of our behaviors and how we come across to others. And that's what those questions are for, is what is your behavior really? How do others necessarily perceive you? What are we missing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. Do you have in the major arcana, because I kind of do, but do you have a favorite card? If you do, tell me what it is. I'm going to read the description from the book so people can kind of know what they're seeing.
Believe it or not, death.
Okay. Now you can explain right now that death, what it means in your own words. Yeah.
It means when transition.
Mm-hmm.
What is the saying that we all know is, what is chaos to the caterpillar is birth to the butterfly.
Mm-hmm.
Death doesn't mean you're going to die. It means you are in transition from one phase of life to another, from one attitude to another, from one job to another. Maybe it's a new car and you've got to adjust. It's anything that you have to adjust to.
Mm-hmm. And so here's the way you put it, and it's, not exactly the same wording, but it's the same thing. It says, death, if ever, will you see this card as a sign of physical death? Rarely. Death is something that happens to us on a continual basis. Our cells die every year. We change our minds every day from moment to moment. Death to some may take place in order for the future to happen. To decide is to kill off all possibilities, to choose one thing over another. And then you talk about the caterpillar must die to become a butterfly. But then you go on to say that if the death card appears in a reading, major changes are happening or about to happen. The kind of changes that forever changes and transform your life, such as the birth of a baby, a new job or a promotion, getting engaged, divorced, a new house. Each moment at a door closes and another one opens. So it's representing also of a unique opportunity. It presents a unique opportunity to shed your old attitudes and eliminate what's not necessary in your life or in a new chapter of your life, and that it's time to finish your old business and bring it to a close. A new chapter is waiting impatiently. So, I mean, each card has a really good explanation, plus the shadow side, plus the questions. And wait a minute, I just closed it, but I want to see what the questions were for the death card. Because, I honestly, I'm not changing the subject totally while I'm looking, but interpretation, everything, I had somebody I didn't know them from Adam, but my publisher sent me a note yesterday. She said, look, here's a review of your cards, the new deck. And so I listened to this thing. It was on YouTube. This guy had no clue about the decks. He had no clue about what anything meant. And, it's a witch deck. So there were cards like the Banshee and things like that. And he's going, oh, these cards are scary. They're scary. And, this is somebody who doesn't know, but he's going to scare people away, thinking that, oh, the witch is scary, the skeleton, I have a gargoyle, that scared him. He went through all the cards, and everything that wasn't, flowers, scared the hell out of him. And so that was the process of his whole review of the thing, because he was afraid of that. He said, I'm a white witch, and I don't talk about anything negative and bad and blah, blah, and I'm thinking, oh, good Lord.
It's very unrealistic, actually, to say you never say anything or never think about anything negative. And that certainly speaks a lot more about how he feels than your cards.
Well, yeah, but I mean, in his interpretation, like we're talking about the interpretation of the death card and all the other ones, in his interpretation, the skull was scary to him. But the skull in my deck has a bed of flowers. Oh God, I can't think of the word. But it has flowers around its head. That's the one that means live for the day.
Mm-hmm. A skull has always been representative of the container for spirit anyway. So I don't understand why he would think it was scary.
Yeah, and then he read about the banshee. He was reading, because I do a little history of each card, and she's calling death, and oh no, that's scaring me. And then the gargoyle, oh, that's a monster. And I'm thinking, oh my God, yeah, I know.
I would give you a totally different review.
Well, yeah, so what I guess I'm using that as an example about how people can get the impression about something at face value.
We always look at things through our own filters. And if you're looking at life in a fearful way, then everything that's coming at you, whether it's on TV or a new deck of cards or the traffic outside, is all going to be fearful to you. You're going to live like a victim.
Yeah.
And so the whole point is from my perspective, he needs to take a look at why he's afraid of these things, why they seem scary to him instead of neutral.
Yeah, I think I'd be more afraid of a gun pointing at me than a gargoyle.
Pretty much.
Yeah. It's a difference. And it may be, his background. It may be his belief system or whatever. But, he would say in the tarot, the devil card would be a horrible thing. That would probably be the worst card to him, even worse than death, because that's probably where it is. And the devil card doesn't mean, the devil's not coming after you with a pitchfork.
No, certainly not. That's about struggle and conflict.
And sometimes maybe also acting a little bit careless, too.
That's exactly.
Yeah. So it's really interesting when people pick up cards and you just kind of have to, you can't not put aside your belief system or what you were taught, but you can look at it as not everything is out to strangle you.
No, that's true. And it's a point of when we talk to our clients and they see something, like they'll see the death card and they'll go, oh my God, no. It's a chance to educate.
Mm-hmm. And people hate the Tower card. Personally, they're afraid of the Tower card because, classically it means this horrible sudden change that you have no control over and everything. And I see it
having a baby.
Well, that's it. And I also see it that, maybe you've had to do something, you've needed to do it for such a long time and you haven't done it. So the universe kind of comes in and takes over and does it for you, not to ruin your life, but to make it better, because that change needed to be, so it's not an icky card. It's not a bad card, but, that's the beauty kind of tarot and even oracle decks and everything, is that you use your imagination, you use what you feel, it gets into your soul and it allows you to think and say things that you normally wouldn't.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great tool for self-expression. It's also a great tool for drawing that out in your clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because, I again, people are so sick of me saying this, but you don't live in the black and white. The gray area is where all the possibilities are.
Yes, it is. Very much so.
And if you open up to the gray, then everything else falls into place, and it's just so much better. Well, I'm sure you have a few decks in your possession. So, and you're using the Rider-Waite deck all the time, but do you have a particular very favorite deck that maybe you use or don't use, but...
The two decks that I use the most is the Robin Wood deck for everyday readings. Mm-hmm. And then if the reading becomes confusing or a client needs a little bit more explanation than I can give, I will use, it's called the Spirit deck. So it looks like some of the symbology is different, but it's still, they look like ghosts on the card, and it represents the subconscious, what's going on underneath, or what's going on in the realm you can't see. It's not because it can also represent the spirit world. And so it's a way of digging a little deeper. So those are the two decks that I use the most. I rarely use anything else because those two decks work for me. But that I just bought an adult-oriented deck for relationship readings. Mm-hmm. And so I've yet to even get those out and look at them because they're like really different. Sorry. But so it's whatever works the best for the person. Mm-hmm. And those are the two decks that work the best for me, is the Robin Wood deck and the Spirit deck.
Okay. All right, we've got about 2 minutes. So I want you to tell everybody where they can find you. If you do readings, where, and are you going to be doing here and there different locations or whatever, any events, and where to find you and your books.
Well, I can be found in person in San Antonio, Texas. We do some events around town, not as much as I used to, because now they're just coming to the house to get their readings. I will do readings over the phone. You can contact me through Facebook, or if you live in San Antonio, you can come see me. And on Thursdays at 7:30, except for days I'm being interviewed by the wonderful Marla Brooks, my business partner and I have a live Facebook show where we do mini readings and get in touch with spirit for the people who happen to show up.
So where can they find that?
That's on Facebook Live every Thursday at 7:30.
And your name, her name?
Edith Mary Stanley.
So that's all they have to do is go there, and you'll be...
Yes, ma'am.
You'll be there right alive and doing your thing.
I'll be there. Now, don't use the initials. It has to be the whole name, because there's many people with the same initials that I have. Mm-hmm. And oddly enough, the same last name, too. So just use the whole name, Edith Mary Stanley. If that doesn't get it, you can look for the Psychic Goddesses, and we'll pick you up through that way. All of my contact information is spread out all over Facebook, so it can be found that way. The books can be found directly through me or on Amazon.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for taking your time and cutting off your weekly thing for me. I appreciate it, and everybody in the chat room does, I'm sure.
This was important to me, and I appreciate the opportunity you've given me to be a guest on your show. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, come back. Don't be a stranger.
I never have. I listened to you other times, too. I've listened to the podcast for a couple of years.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much. So we will be in touch, and thank you, everybody, for listening in. And until next time, everybody, blessed be, and merry meet again. Good night.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Please join us again next week at the same time for another great guest and more cauldron stirring. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2019. The Mysterioso March by Kevin MacLeod is licensed through incompetech.com.